need to catch up to my notes. It was a rush morning. Let me see, if I go like this, I'm going to go like this. It does do it. Titus 2:15. Last Sunday we spent a lot of time looking through verses 11 through 14. Today I'm going to slow down a bit again, and we'll be looking at chapter 2, verse 15. And then chapter 3, verse 1 and 2, doing a lot of application as we look at this section as well. I should be able to finish chapter 3 next week. Enforcing the new law. This is right after the conversation about God's grace appearing and bringing salvation, and then how that spurs us to represent ourselves in a particular way in the world. So he concludes chapter 2 and verse 15. These things speak and exhort and reprove with all authority. Let no one disregard you. I think this is going to play heavily into chapter 3. In fact, some would have the break at the end of chapter 14 before verse 15 begins, the paragraph there. But briefly, you're to declare, exhort, and rebuke, which means tell a fault is kind of the difference there. It's declare is to state a fact, exhort is to encourage that factual behavior or the behavior that comes as a result of the fact, and then rebuke is to point out when you're not exhibiting behavior that follows the fact. So it's what you're supposed to do, and in light of that, what you may not do, or what you may do and what you may not do is kind of the distinctions between those. They're not absolute, but that's a little bit there. Rebuke is to tell a fault. With all authority, it says, and then he follows up, let no one disregard you. Now, chapter says, remind them to be subject to rulers, to authorities, and to be obedient, and to be ready for every good deed. All right, then, is it possible that we're having a conversation here, as is not all that uncommon in Scripture, where the authority of somebody who's bringing God's word is being challenged in some way? Now, as we read this, speak, exhort, and reprove with all authority, what does this remind me of? Well, in the context of Titus, the responsibilities of an elder. So the question would be, is Titus behaving as an elder here? That's the first question I would have. Because the responsibilities, rebuke with all authority. Well, what authority would that be? The authority that the word has behind what he's saying, the message that he's bringing. I am not inclined to believe that Titus has been appointed an elder officially. However, I'm very confident it's the case that he has not been. We recognize the fact, as we have studied this, that we have the same responsibilities in terms of our behavior, certainly. So is Titus behaving as an elder? Not in the formal sense, certainly. However, he has knowledge. He's obviously, based upon the fact that the book exists at all, supposed to be teaching the people these things. And he's supposed to be doing it with all authority. And perhaps I would suggest that because he is not in that leadership role exactly, maybe he's dealing with some questions about whether or not he has the right to do this. Paul dealt with that constantly in all of his letters to churches. He's pointing out that he does have the authority to accomplish certain things on God's behalf. So perhaps Paul is sensitive to this reality. Perhaps Titus has mentioned something specifically. All I know is verse 15 of chapter 2, reprove with all authority. And then chapter 3, verse 1, which is a man-made break, remind them to be subject to rulers and to authorities and to be obedient. In other words, you're supposed to have this authority, and if they're not recognizing this authority, you need to remind them that you've got it, whatever that authority might be. Does that make sense in terms of building some context before I continue? All right, verse 1, and I'm going to read 1 and 2 both. Remind them to be subject to rulers, authorities, and to be obedient and ready for every good deed, to malign no one, to be peaceable, gentle, and showing every consideration for all men. So in the immediate context, is Titus' authority being challenged? Actually, if that were the case, this is a matter of God's will being rejected, is it not? In other words, Titus comes along and says, these are the things you need to know, and they might be responding, as they have responded to Paul and others, no, we don't believe you, essentially. And so the point here is that if that happens, God's will is being rejected. Compare this to Matthew 10, because Titus is not the only one who might have experienced this. Matthew 10, verse 33. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny him before my Father who is in heaven. Verse 32, one who confesses me before men, I will confess him before my Father in heaven. If you deny the messenger, you deny the person who has sent the messenger. Also, way back in 1 Samuel, we should remember this fairly well, when Israel is clamoring for a king towards the end of the time of the judges, chapter 8, verse 1 of 1 Samuel. And it came about when Samuel was old that he appointed his sons to be judges. Verse 3, his sons did not walk in his ways. Verse 4, the elders gathered together. Verse 5, and said to him, behold, you have grown old, your sons did not walk in your ways, appoint for us a king. Verse 6, the thing was displeasing in the sight of Samuel when they said this. So Samuel prayed, and the Lord said to Samuel, listen to the voice of the people in regard of what they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. So, when the messenger brings a message, when the people reject it, it's unfortunately often disguised as, but it's not necessarily personal. a good reminder for Titus. All right, so, back in Titus 3, verse 1, remind them. Reminders are necessary. I've been following a pattern here as I've been discussing the obvious. Look at Proverbs 12 very quickly. I think I only mentioned this once. Proverbs 12. We're dealing with a group of people who are supposed to know the word already. Remind them. Proverbs 12:1. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof is stupid. Another verse I was thinking of that I did not try to bring up right away is how does it go? He who accepts correction. Anyone? I can't remember the rest of it. That's not exactly the way it's phrased, but that's the concept here.
I think it's a wise man accepts correction.
Oh, yeah. Right. A wise man accepts correction. I can't remember how it ends there, but a wise man accepts correction, which means that they were probably fairly wise beforehand. Then there is always room to grow. However, no matter where we are at, reminders are necessary. This is something chapter 2, verse 15 and 3:1, that they were to have known already, but they needed the reminder. Remind them what? To be subject, obedient, which means put under. They're to be subject to all authorities and rulers, ready for every good deed. So this put under, it's used in 1 Corinthians 16, and I'd like to look at this word fairly briefly. 1 Corinthians 16:16. So that you may be in subjection. Let me back up. Now I urge you, brethren, this is verse 15. You know the household of Stephanus, that they were the first fruits of Achaia, devoted themselves for the ministry of the saints, that you be in subjection to such men, and to everyone who helps in the work and labor. This is a brotherly subjection that is used here in this verse. They are equals in the sense of the work. It's not necessarily that one has authority over the other, but they are supposed to behave in such a way as to look after the other person's wishes. I'll put it that way, to consider the other person's wishes. So very rapidly, this provides a concept of something that is not new at all to us. It's just perhaps couched in the concept of authority. And I would like to suggest that one of the things that might be going on here is considering the fact that these Christians lived in a time of a hostile government towards the faith, an exceptionally hostile one. Perhaps there was some sort of inclination to believe that responsibility of behavior that we are to have towards one another in the church and to those in need outside was not being applied to people who were ugly to them, specifically people who would be ruling over them. Does that make sense? In other words, yeah, we're nice to each other, we'll accept us that are outside the group, but when it comes to these people who are persecuting us, there's no requirement for me to treat that person well. And so here's a reminder, perhaps even in the word to be subject. Okay, that word again is used in another location to describe a relationship between people, co-workers, essentially. Okay, people of equal. So the way you would treat somebody that you love, treat the person who is treating you poorly. Not a new concept at all. Look over in Ephesians 5. Ephesians 5:21. Respect to one another in the fear of Christ. Again, the concept here in this word, again, that doesn't mean it's used this way all the time, but in some instances, it is used in the case of the relationship with each other. You're on the same level. You don't necessarily have authority one over the other, but you have a responsibility to consider the other person's needs, wishes, concerns, that sort of thing as well. Similar to a Romans 14 relationship. what would cause this brother to stumble? Well, let that person's fears or concerns have an effect on the way you behave around them. So, this is an opportunity to show submission because God says so, regardless of what man-made authority requires. If you turn back to Isaiah briefly, Isaiah 29. Now, this is one I can't remember if I double-checked it to make sure I had it correctly after I first studied this or not. Isaiah 20. Oh. Then the Lord said, because this people draw near with their words and honor me with their lip service, but they remove their hearts far from me, and their reverence for me consists of tradition learned by rote, therefore behold, I will once again deal marvelously with this people, wondrously marvelous. Basically, regardless of what he's going to do with them, that is the because in verse 13. The point that I want to draw from this is that there is the possibility of pretending to be submissive to authority without actually being submissive to authority. So just as we tend to show one another love and not really mean it by our behavior, speaking about somebody poorly behind their back, not considering their weaknesses as we exhibit behavior that would cause them to struggle, that sort of thing. I think Titus on that sort of concept in terms of our relationship with each other, again, specifically in the context of authority now, not necessarily love itself. Is that, you follow, Dad? Okay, we're doing all right? Okay, so the point is that authority figures, at least this is what I'm getting, the authority figures are no less deserving of loving attitudes from us based upon this. If this word can be used to describe the relationship between brothers and used to describe the relationship between you and somebody who has authority over you, the point is treat these people the same, and that is treat them well. And this makes perfect sense in the context of everything we've read in chapter 2. Let's continue with this for a moment. I would like to discuss the word principality moment in verse 1. I will be brief about this, and then I will move on. Verse 1 of chapter 3, again, remind them to be subject to rulers, to authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good deed. Some translations, not the one I'm reading out of now, which is the New American Standard, but the ESV would use the word principalities there instead of authorities. Why would they do that? Why does this word change a little bit? So, I just discussed the concept of lip service, and lip service is something we're supposed to avoid. In other words, I am submissive to you. Well, you're not submissive in your... Keeping with that thought. The word here that is translated authorities or principalities emphasizes the importance of genuine submission. The word nearly always, out of the 58 times it appears in Scripture, 40 of them are translated the word beginning. The concept of authorship or source. Does that make sense? And I think this is important. So, Colossians 1:16. Colossians 1:16. Okay, this is speaking of the Godhead. For by him all things were created, heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. Okay, authority derives all its authority, I should work on this, from God. God allows authority to take place in some instances through the inspired word. We know he specifically directed authority to be placed in a particular person, whether it was an apostle or an enemy of the Israelites. A king directed us there. The word there in 16, that out on the American Standard is authorities, is principalities. If you look down in verse 18, he is also head of the body of the church, and he is the beginning. It's the same word as the authority principalities in verse 16. Okay, so what does this mean? He is the beginning. Well, the beginning of what? He's the source. He's the author. He is the place from which it sprang. That is this word. Through 6. 1. Therefore, leaving the elementary teaching about the Christ, let us press on to maturity, not laying again a foundation of repentance from dead works and faith towards God. The elementary teaching there is in some versions, I think we'll say the principles or the principal things. It's the same word. The foundation, the source, the point at which it started, that's this word. if we're on board, it does occasionally show up as the word first, depending, and not often, it rarely refers to an individual. It does, I phrase this poorly, it does refer to an individual now and then, a specific person. It doesn't do it often. When it does do it, it's often Christ. So taking all those things into account, it references the start, the root, the first, the source. Yes, there's an authority in front of me. And in some instances, that word is talking about the source of that authority, where that authority starts from, particularly when it comes to a human being, Christ. So to remain consistent in our application of this verse, I believe we must honor authority that has been granted to an entity or being by the source. That can be complex or difficult to describe further, but let me give you an example. Consider submission to authority not just the man itself. We often hear the discussion about you respect the office of the president, not necessarily the man and his behavior, but there is authority behind that man, and we respect that authority. A husband and wife relationship, for example. Does a husband always deserve submission and respect? Well, if he does, not necessarily by his behavior, at least in my experience. However, Janice still respects the authority that I have. Okay, she's submissive to that. Even though my personal behavior, attitude, presentation doesn't necessarily mean that I deserve that. It's not based upon the merit of my competency that requires that of her. The same thing with a parent and a child. Do parents make mistakes? Yes. Is the child supposed to be submissive to that parent? Yes. You think about it in the military too. I remember watching a docudrama, and one was above the other, and they hated each other, and then the one rose above the one who had been above him, and the belligerent man that had been the superior officer refused to acknowledge the other, and that man said, you salute the rank, not the man. You salute the rank. I may not respect, but I have this authority, and you must recognize that authority. So all this, I believe, can be discussed in the concept of the word principalities and how it is used in Scripture as the source, the beginning. It's not just a matter of, Nero. Was Nero worthy of respect? His authority,
No and yes.
yeah, no and yes. Was his as a person, were the positions he took godly and worthy on their own? No. So why was this important? Because it's not actually always about the person. It's about the authority that they represent. John.
Here's a better example that no one is unworthy of that authority of the person. There's only one person.
Right. Which is why
The
this
office is always the.
right. The office is what you are supposed to be respecting there.
Because that office has been given by God.
Right.
Person.
So we submit because we should, not because the authority figure necessarily deserves it by their own merit. So, curiously enough, authority kind of falls under a category similar to the way, as I mentioned a moment ago, we think about something like love or forgiveness, where it's not necessarily because the person deserves it in that sense, but that we are required to do this as a better example of how we are to live. All right, so I'll go ahead and continue there, and I'm moving on from the definition of that word. I just wanted to bring that up. I think it's important in terms, yes, Dan.
You kind of come up twice to an issue of limits. Are you eventually going?
I'm actually not going. I skipped 3 slides today. I wrote them all out, and I'm skipping them. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I will say this: we are under more than one authority in this country. The reason that is the case is because authority goes only so far as it's granted. Okay? And if we believe that authority has been granted to a particular person or entity or principality, and we have more than one of those, let's say we've got 2, let's make it simple, we've got 2 reigning monarchs, okay? And one defies the source of their authority, and one does not defy the source of their authority. I believe we're responsible to follow the one who maintains a relationship with the source of their authority, or else we are stuck, because we cannot follow both. Even in practical, in amoral situations, okay, where there's not scripture that inherently would lead to a discussion about what is the morally necessary thing to do, This one is saying, I have authority, but he's usurping authority from another. Well, if we're supposed to be responsible to this person as well, okay, where did you get that authority from? Because you just took it from this guy, and I'm supposed to be responsible to this person. Okay. If one gives it up, if we sign away our rights, we've accepted different authority in that way. And I mean, I've talked about this before, and Dad, go ahead. I'll leave it at that.
Well, there are biblical examples that lead us to principles that there are limits.
The king and the priesthood is one that comes to mind to me very quickly.
John the Baptist.
Yeah.
Okay. Paul, his jail in Philippi, where he said, well, let him go, and he said, no, you come out and let us go.
It's Rome. Was it Philippi?
Okay.
Okay, so for the example of Paul, and where is that? Do you remember? It's Acts 16. Yeah, I was going to say Acts 16. We'll go ahead and, I'm still not going to bring up my slides, but we'll go there. Towards the end of the chapter, verse 37, Paul said to them, they have beaten us in public without trial, men who are Romans, and they have thrown us into prison, and now they are sending us away secretly. Secretly? Question mark? No, indeed. Let them come out themselves and bring us out. The policemen reported these words to the chief magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Romans. So they came and appealed to them and begged them to leave the city. Essentially what we've got going on here is Paul's rights have been violated as a Roman citizen. Okay? When the commander, the chief magistrate, realizes that that he, the chief magistrate, has gone beyond what authority was granted to them, he was frightened because he recognized there was a limit to his authority. Okay. Curiously enough, in more ways than one, our nation is similar to Rome. And one of them at the moment is the fact that we have magistrates over us, and we have an executive branch, and we have a judicial branch, for example. Particularly even locally, we have those sorts of things. And we are equally responsible to both, I believe, in terms of respecting the authority they have. And if one entity, if one principality says, I am taking over the authority I do not have, to accept the authority that you're supposed to respect from another group, come follow me, I'll take this authority away from somebody you're supposed to respect and follow me. I don't see how we can do that. The really relevant application of this would be if the executive branch says, I'm going to legislate. I understand how we can accept that legislation as authority to be accepted, because that would be ignoring the authority that the legislative branch has. Anything else? Anyone? I really don't want to hang around here too much because I'll get hot.
Eventually, I mean, we're all going to face this conflict.
Right.
It's
Sure. Yeah.
Eventually, you get back to Acts when it said, when Peter and John before the council say whether it's right to obey you rather than God. Okay, we're going to obey God.
Right.
Okay. When there is a conflict there, we have this principle to fall back on. Okay, God has provided that for us. It may involve some real inconvenience, and I think I understood it there is when the conflict exists.
So just like two man-made, not man-made, two represented as man authorities in conflict with each other. If we are supposed to be respecting both, how do we go about that? Okay, the easier one to understand is two authorities, God and man, and when man has taken for itself authority that actually belongs to God, we know who to follow there, and that ultimately where it becomes the most important. Well, it's the most difficult to accomplish, but it is the easiest to understand. Yeah.
But when you have the two men who are not taking from God, that you are both under, there's the difference.
Right.
And then that's what it's about.
Right. And so what is our purpose? What is the purpose? This man that we're obeying says to do this, and therefore I must. Well, what if the only reason he's saying that at all is because he's stepped outside his authority to try to take something from someone that we are also supposed to? In other words, if that is the route you're going to take, you have come out no better, because you are still denying an authority out there. I have to follow him because he said this and I'm supposed to obey authority. Well, what about this one that you're also equally required to obey? You can't, Jonathan.
You're phrasing it as usurping authority, which is the real root, so it's better for sort of drawing a principle, but in practice, it pretty much always comes down to, well, maybe not always, but very often it come down to one who you were supposed to obey says do A, and the second who you're supposed to obey says B, and A and B are opposite things. Unless you accept a limitation to authority, you will sin in the situation.
Right.
You have absolutely no choice.
There's no recourse whatsoever.
And
Right.
God won't do that to us.
Right.
Therefore, you have to accept limits to authority.
In other words,
The details of that are more complicated,
So-
but you can't.
So, for example, in Roman times, was the emperor's authority absolute? Well, technically it was. He could, eventually they reached a point where the emperor could break any law that he himself invented, right? It was that way, it became that way. If you're interested in knowing more about that, just hang around. Watch it for the next couple of years, right? But that being said, he had absolute authority, except for what God's authority had. And so any time he violated what God allowed him to have, which was everything, okay? That was the point at which we must stop. Sometimes there's sooner points that we must stop, considering the fact that it is shared. But there are always limits. I was talking with Janice about this yesterday, and I didn't want to linger, but one of the things that amazes me is that God's law is so, just tell me what to do. The concept of silence restricts is a golden concept, because here it is, you know what I mean? And God spends a little bit of time telling us what we must do. He even said once, I couldn't believe you, I didn't even think to tell you not to, right? And what is man's approach? Let's think of absolutely every little thing that we think we were not supposed to be doing. Janice and I have been experiencing some of the wonders of New York State and its approach towards child rearing recently. And there's discussions in the manual about how to raise children. We read this one yesterday. Do not, as a form of corporal punishment, you should not force your child to walk on her hands and knees, across a floor covered in rice. Okay, now what's your first, somebody hadn't done that. And so they made a law. But again, what's the previous slide, God has a standard for us regardless of the way other people treat us, regardless of the way our children treat us. And that's a tough one for me to recognize, and we're supposed to follow that. And everything else gets thrown out. So I shouldn't have to be told, don't force your child to walk on their hands and knees across rice. Okay? Because I'm treating them well. That's my goal. So much of a standard. Anything else? All right, let's continue here. I don't want to miss the purpose. Once he's had this conversation, identifying who the authorities are and how we are supposed to obey them, it becomes a question of why. Why is it so important that we identify who our authority figures are, and why is it so important that we treat them a particular way? The end of verse 1 of chapter 3, be obedient to be ready for every good deed. Nothing here has changed in terms of what Paul is talking about in the conversation of Titus throughout this whole book. It's been behavior, behavior, behavior. We've talked about it amongst one another. We've talked about it as a person who's trying to direct a church. We're talking about it in terms of the danger of false teachers coming in. And now we've mentioned authority figures, but it's really a passing glance. Okay, there's half a verse here. He immediately gets back to your behavior, to be ready for every good work. We are supposed to be prepared. Turn to Luke 12. Luke 12, verse 40. You too be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect. Just a brief reminder here as we consider why it is that we are supposed to always be prepared to do good things, that ultimately we don't know when Christ is returning. And if we are caught at that point in sin, even, what's the word I'm looking for, not really lackadaisical, but like apathetic sin. We don't care anymore. We're not trying to do the right thing. We're stagnating, like some of the churches from Revelation. That is not where we're supposed to be at. 1 Peter 3:15. Sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you. But do it with gentleness and reverence. We are supposed to be ready for every good work, not just because of our hope of salvation, but also for the fact that people are going to challenge us. And we need to be prepared to respond to that. So, this word every in every good work, every means all, any, thoroughly, or whatsoever. All of these would be relevant here. I'm not sure that I learn a whole lot by that, but let's just talk through them for a minute. How prepared are we to answer false teaching in public or private? I'm not really going to apply much beyond this, but let's consider this. Answer false teaching in public or private. And by private, I mean maybe it's within our group, or maybe it's one-on-one with somebody that's not within the group, but from 1 Peter 3:15, we recognize we have to do this in gentleness and reverence. Okay. Particularly, well, I won't say. To answer false teaching, we might encounter it more amongst ourselves. To support the needy. We haven't discussed this at all during this class. It's not been brought up necessarily, but we need to be prepared to help. True religion is this, to visit widows and orphans, okay? I'm not saying that necessarily means that well, it absolutely can mean that I'm going to visit a widow or an orphan, but there are opportunities to support that concept all around us, and we need to be considering, is this a corporate thing? No, it's not. Is it something we're supposed to be doing? Yes, it is. What we're talking about here in Titus, is this a corporate thing? And here I am motioning to Luke. It's not. It's a personal behavior thing. I better find this again before I lose it altogether. I really need like a yellow bookmark. To encourage one another. For every good deed. We're supposed to be ready for every good deed. To encourage. And a ruler can come along and do this. One of the things that fascinated me when I was back with the older children studying Acts, is you get towards the end of Acts, and you see two things. Paul's preparation before the authorities that he was presented to whom he was presented. Okay? His preparedness there is incredible, but also the fact that it happened at all. You know what I mean? The sequence of events where the Jews are sending out a bunch of men to try to kill him in the night while he's being transferred from one city to another. And so I think they ended up sending like 600 horses to accompany him or whatever. Not just horses, but men on horses. Okay, to make sure that he wasn't injured or captured in any way, because they wanted to appeal to a higher authority there. And so the efforts that man went to preserve Paul's life, that gave Paul an opportunity because he was prepared. Okay? And what do I get from that? Boy, suffering can happen, but if we're prepared, it always becomes an opportunity. How prepared are we to do that? And so there's been like Caesar, Agrippa, you know, whether they knew it or not, getting encouraged from what Paul said, hearing what they needed to hear in that situation. Are we able to show spiritual direction? And the answer is absolutely not. Because now that I have children, that becomes apparent to me all the time, where the situation happens, and whatever it is that's in front of me, I'm just not prepared. That doesn't mean I handle it absolutely poorly, but I know I'm missing something some of the time. So we need to be prepared to do all these things. And again, in the context of 3 verse 1, all on its own, are willing to treat everyone, in this instance authority, in chapter 2, each other, and they listed everyone, specifically by name, as it were, in there. If we have that attitude, we will be in a situation, all of this is culminating to this concept. Are we able to do this with each other, those around us, even those above us, even when they are in the world? I think I'm moving on. I am. Chapter 3, verse 2. Be ready for every good deed, the end of verse 1. To malign no one. Some use the word blaspheme, I believe. But to be peaceable, gentle, and showing every consideration for all men. Certainly the word is blaspheme in malign no one. That is that word. And I wanted to look at that word for a few minutes, and this is kind of where we'll hang out for the rest of our time. That word means vilify, defame, revile, rail on. What else do I have? Back that up. Rail on. Where'd it go? There it is. Okay, rail on. Vilify, defame, revile, or rail on. That's what the word means. So now, what does this look like for us? I would suggest don't do unto others what you should not do unto God. Are we uncomfortable, which, yes, I'm playing on the golden rule idea here. Okay, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Don't do unto others what you should not do unto God. And this is never stated this way. I would invite you to provide an example where this is not true. Okay, now, when we think about blasphemy, we specifically, maybe the world is this way too, I don't really know, but certainly amongst ourselves, when I think blasphemy, I think it's specific to the Lord. Okay, I don't really think of myself being able to blaspheme other people. However, here, we're in a conversation about how we respect authority. Okay, which suddenly takes it closer to home. So I'm not just allowed to shake my fist at the sky and invite lightning upon myself. I shouldn't be doing that, okay? Does Richard Dawkins make me uncomfortable? Yes, by the things he says. I mean, dude, you're blaspheming, you know? Are you ready for a little static, you know? And it just, you know, it strikes you that way, doesn't it? Am I as uncomfortable when I experience somebody else disrespecting an authority that they're under, particularly when it's an authority I disagree with? That person is engaging in something or demanding something that I don't like. Okay. What does blaspheme look like in that situation? Vilify, defame, revile, rail upon. What I do know is if you wouldn't do this to God, or commanded not to, here it's indicating we shouldn't do it to man either. So, with that thought in mind, never, ever, 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 ever blaspheme anyone. Please remind me not to do it. Look over in Jude. We looked at this recently, verse 9. Let's look at verse 8. In the same way, these men, also by dreaming, defile the flesh, reject authority, that is, blaspheme, revile, there's one of our words there, angelic majesties. But Michael the archangel, when he disputed with the devil and argued about the body of Moses, did not dare pronounce against him a railing judgment, there's our word rail, but said, rather the Lord rebuke you. Okay, so we have an angelic majesty versus the devil. And the angelic majesty, forget about us, the angelic majesty will not blaspheme Satan. You don't blaspheme Satan. Now, okay, so I went from, we don't blaspheme God. Oh no, we don't do that. We need to be careful not to blaspheme man. An angel won't blaspheme Satan? Let's this a little further. 2 Peter 2. I mean, because this throws things in a light where I'm going, oh, it's a good thing I haven't been struck yet, you know? The 2 Peter 2 verse, it's always in the middle of a sentence. Well, halfway through 10. They are daring and self-willed. They do not tremble when they revile, blaspheme, angelic majesties. And then he draws a comparison. Whereas the angels, that I just mentioned in the previous verse, who are greater in might and power than the people who are blaspheming the angels, do not bring reviling judgment against them before the Lord. The angels don't revile the sinner. Okay? The example he's using in verses 6, 7, and 8 is Sodom and Gomorrah. The angels did not take it upon themselves to blaspheme Sodom and Gomorrah. I need to be careful about blaspheming all of a sudden. Until I was preparing for this, I mean, yeah, I've heard verses that relate to this. I understand this in general, but I had not considered it as far as I have suddenly started considering it now. We really, really need to be careful. So let's talk about this for a moment. It may be blasphemy. I just came up with some things. It may be blasphemy if you would be uncomfortable saying it to their face. Okay? Notice here, doesn't mean it's not true. Okay? Sodom and Gomorrah, did God speak evil against them? Well, I would say so. Evil, destruction. Okay? He identified that sin and he purged it. He got it, right? But the angels didn't come up and say, God, you know, these people, he didn't speak evil. That was left to God. It is harsh, but it feels good to say. It feels good to identify sin. And we are supposed to identify sin and beware of it. But primarily in us, that should create a sense of defensive caution, I would say, to make sure we're not engaging in that sin, and sadness that the sin is there. And we see that all the time. As we've been studying Jeremiah, I think I bring this up perhaps a little bit later, just some concepts from Jeremiah. It fluctuates, does it not, where Jeremiah provides the message, and he does so accurately and effectively. He gets it out like he's supposed to. The people blaspheme him, and he turns around and looks at God and does what? The wrong thing, actually, is what he does. He says, look, these people are treating me poorly, and they hate you. What's the deal? Why are you keeping them around? It places your feelings above everything else. Again, you might be right. You might not. And I would suggest that if it's only your feelings you're going on, and perhaps you only know this from experience, that if you say everything based upon the way you feel about it, then you're done before you started, essentially. It doesn't account first for every fact. This would apply specifically with authoritative rule that we experience today. Okay, we're in a world where we are supposed to be obedient to certain authorities. Now, do we hear bad things about the authorities that are over us? All the time. And do we use those things to make judgment calls about that person? I do. Let me put it that way. I won't even ask you. I do. And I need to be careful, because if I take that before the facts have been determined, I mean, in this day and age in particular, it seems so relevant. Okay? I'm trying to accomplish something with this that I should not. I am blaspheming. As it is. Even if I do have the facts, and I'll mention this at the bottom, doesn't mean that I have the right to speak evil against them. If it encourages a personal crisis that could be avoided. Okay? Some of me thrive on drama, okay, in this way. And so if we are exacerbating an issue by discussing something in such a way as to cast aspersions or doubt on a person's character, okay, it's not really my responsibility. God takes care of that. If it invokes God's judgment without invoking God's patience, okay, God gives me time. And coincidentally enough, while I'm given time to improve myself, God gives those around me, whatever the contemporaries, time, Gary.
I think I'll close with this. You may bring this up later. The end of Timothy, it says, he was mentioning Alexander Summers.
Yeah.
May the Lord repay you
That's right.
according to his work.
That's right.
You know, so there's a fine line between blasphemy and God, you take care of it.
I'm going to get there in a moment. Yeah, the Lord take care. I mean, that's what the angel said.
Yeah.
That the Lord will identify if there is sin here.
Yeah.
And I know what I know, honestly, but that's not my responsibility. Yes, I will get there. I think it's the next slide. If an angel would say it to Satan, maybe it's blaspheme. And that really blows my mind. It does. To imagine that is the case, it amazes me. If an angel would say it to Satan, it might be blaspheme. I mean, do we feel like we can hurl abuse at Satan? Yeah, I'd say I do. I'll be honest, I think I do. I feel that way. You might be correct. And it still might be blasphemy. That person might have done that. You might have figured your facts out. The angel might have correctly identified Satan as evil. But he left it to God. He left it to God. So, to continue the conversation about what blasphemy is, and I don't necessarily have an answer here. You're not going to see answer. However, some additional things to think about, and then I guess we'll be done. On a scale of 1 to blasphemy, this is the way we're going to go with it. I'm not good with this kind of thing. Your choices encourage me, I love you. If you say that to somebody, is it blasphemy? Of course not. Okay, no trick questions here. I hope God sends him straight to hell. Would you call that blasphemy? Absolutely. Okay, you would. So, this is not blasphemy, this is. Notice really quickly, I hope God sends him. I start phrasing things differently as we fill this in a bit, because you don't say something like that straight to a person's face. At least we don't. Right? I mean, ugly, mean people do. But this is him. This, you're talking to the person. This, you're talking to somebody else about the person. And I think when that starts happening, you can recognize the fact that you might be on dangerous ground. Please consider God's will more carefully next time. I'm just looking for the mental process here. I'm not saying we're going to cut a line. I don't like what you did, and I enjoy saying so. I'd start cutting a line there, right? I hope one day you were given a child just like you. Okay. I have said this already. I have said it. And to be honest, in attitude, it's really not much different than this. I might be joking, that kind of thing. I know I'm not the only one who said it. We laugh at this. This makes us uncomfortable, and we need to recognize that perhaps we're kidding, and perhaps that's okay. However,
Perhaps they're a really good child.
perhaps they're a really good child. Perhaps they're great. I knew there was a reason I had heard it, right? That bum obviously doesn't care about God. I have thought this.
That person.
In Europe, I thought this. You know, when I remember a specific instance, I'm not saying Dad thought this, but a specific instance where we tried to help somebody out, and within our site, that person just doesn't care. Perhaps factually true. I should be careful. I don't know anything about it except he is in sin. Well, that is terrible. And I know of instances where I don't know anything about it except he is in sin. This is a different kind of blasphemy. It could be blasphemy even if he is in sin. However, if you don't know anything at all, you're really flapping your gums. And dangerous, dangerous territory to be in. The bum obviously doesn't care about me. And I put this lower on the scale in terms of dangerous places to be, because at least here you're pretending that it's about God. And here you're kind of recognizing a reality. But could we get here progressively in our attitude? I have. He's a jerk, he deserves it. No. Is Satan a jerk? Michael didn't say so. Michael didn't say so. How interesting is that? He's a jerk, he deserves worse. And these are things that I have either said or heard. I hope he gets plugged. Save the taxpayers a lot of trouble. Now this is what I have said. Okay, even when the facts are out there, this person's should be sentenced to death, but there's a mass shooting. I hope they didn't catch him. I hope he just took care of it on his own. Michael the Archangel didn't save Satan. He deserves to be put on a chain and starved. I've seen this on Facebook. Talking about people. Because of the way that person behaves, he deserves to be put on a chain and starved. That's a direct quote. Mindy's seen it too. We were both there for that one. I could not believe it. There was more respect for an animal that this person was accused of abusing than there was for the person themselves. Where is the patience? Okay, did the person who said that feel better for having said it? I think they did. I think they think they did. Okay, they saw something they didn't like and they called it out as bad, and maybe it was. Okay, but in any other context whatsoever, this is not right. That is speaking evil of somebody. That is wishing on them something horrible. That, as the person would admit, you wouldn't want to have him to adopt. Which anyway, finally he's dead. I've thought this one as well. Really, really old senator, maybe dictator. Michael didn't say about Satan. We should be careful. So, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. We'll review this very quickly next time. But we'll leave it alone. We should be able to wrap up next week in Paris. Thank you for your participation.